Hey there, welcome to the Autumn Brueckmann Show. We have a lot to unpack on today's first ever episode with 4 brand new segments. So sit back, relax, and let's get started. Our first segment today is 2034 in the news. So if you're not familiar with 2034, it's 2034, a cautionary tale. This is a modern take on the themes of 1984, so a dystopian novel. Think of Orwellian dystopia mixed with woke ideology. And when I was writing this novel, I was taking ideas from current news, current events, what's happening in our world now, and just thinking, what's this going to look like if this is pushed further? But what's happening is that even already we're seeing more of this appearing in the news, more of this happening in the stories that we see around us. So I wanted to just take some moments to share the stuff that's going on now. I think sometimes we think of Orwell and we think of 1984 and we sort of expect this Big Brother-esque vibe. And since we don't really feel that, we don't think totalitarianism is coming. We don't think these ideologies are being pushed around us. And sometimes we just need to open our eyes a little bit to see what's happening out there and be aware of what could be coming to your own community, because this is already happening here. So the big idea I want to look at today is this idea of medical centers in schools. So how this played in 2034 is that medical centers were just prevalent in schools, and students would go to the nurse routinely to be asked invasive things, asked if they're thinking about switching their gender, if they've ever considered it, if they're using recreational drugs, reminded that these conversations are confidential, growing that divide between schools and parents. But there are actually places today that have medical centers inside schools. So I wanted to share a little bit about that. So this article is from July, so it's not new, but it's still happening. This is in Seattle. Seattle schools provide free gender-affirming care through on-campus health centers. The biggest school district in Washington is offering gender-affirming care to students at no cost through 2 independent health centers on campus. Seattle Public Schools confirmed it's one of many services students can receive from professionals at 2 independent health centers. Other services include wellness physicals and counseling. The 2 centers are located inside a middle school and a high school. And so when I was writing 2034, I was just picturing this idea of medical centers in schools being something that a politician could just easily run with on a campaign. Just, how convenient it would be. And parents wouldn't have to worry about scheduling doctor's appointments. And we can make sure all the kids get their vaccinations and, all these things that make it sound convenient. And of course, that's the cost, right, is our freedom. We're giving up our freedom, our choice, our hand in the decision-making of what's happening. And we're just saying, we give up this freedom that we have now for the convenience of having somebody else do it for us. And I hope that you can see the corruption that's just so easy if this situation is set up. So anytime something becomes bureaucratic, the way that people think through it changes from what would be the best way to approach the situation to what's the easiest to document way to approach the situation. And that's definitely what would happen with healthcare here, right? When parents are involved in the care of their children, right? It's personal, it's their own child, and they just want what's best for them. That's all that they're looking for. When you make it bureaucratic and you really put that in the hands of the school, of the government, of someone else to make these kinds of decisions, well, now you have checklist decisions, and it's going to be, what can I document? What can I do to prove that I made a response to this situation, instead of just purely thinking what's best for the child? And of course, that's going to mean more medication to respond to things, instead of doing a deeper dive and looking at underlying issues. So you can see how Big Pharma would want to have a hand in this. You can see easily if there's going to be medical centers in school. Now Big Pharma is going to want to start having relationships with schools. And hopefully you can understand how easily the corruption would just pile on and on and on. We already see Big Pharma doing so many underhanded things, the lawsuits that they face, that, the media tries to play down, the things that we've been told throughout the years just about how we should respond to medical situations that haven't been true. We don't want this kind of thing to grow. So the good news is that if we read a little bit further in the article, it says conservative parental rights advocacy group, Parents Defending Education, based in Virginia, believes that schools are not the right place for gender affirming care. So the good news is that we do have advocacy groups who are responding. And I think that's important. If anything like this is happening in your community, be sure to be vocal about it and take that stance against it. The more people that we have speaking up against these things, the less likely they are to spread, and the more people will realize the corruption that can really come easily with these types of situations. So up next, we're going to be talking actually kind of about this. It's about soft totalitarianism. And this concept plays out in this book called Live Not by Lies by Rod Dreher. So our next segment is called Cultural Conversations. So in this segment, I want to take the time to look at the bigger picture. So we see a lot of what's going on in the news. We can see how crazy it is, hear a bunch of commentary about what people think is going to happen next or why it's happening now. But sometimes we need to pull back this bigger picture lens and look at, what's going on socially, culturally, what's happened historically, to really get a grasp of why people are thinking this, why people are feeling this way, and what's coming out. So in the book, Live Not by Lies, Rod Dreher takes the first half of this book and he talks about soft totalitarianism. And I think it's an important idea for people to be familiar with and understand, because it'll help them understand some of the framework of what's happening today and what's going on in the news in our culture. So I wanted to start with a quote from the book. This totalitarianism won't look like the USSR's. It's not establishing itself through hard means like armed revolution or enforcing itself with gulags. Rather, it exercises control, at least initially, in soft forms. This totalitarianism is therapeutic. It masks its hatred of dissenters from its utopian ideology in the guise of helping and healing. And when I read that quote, I immediately thought of Riley Gaines, thought of her swim team and the fact that they were supposed to have a teammate who was a male, and just how uncomfortable that made them feel. And then the response to that, right? It wasn't harsh. There was no violence. There was no guns. There was no threats. It was therapeutic. It was, well, if this is not something you're okay with, then we have counseling services for you, and we can provide therapy for you. This, we're going to help you overcome this. We're going to heal you of this. We're going to change your viewpoint so that this will be okay with you. And it's still coercive. It's still this, we're right and you're wrong, obviously, but we're going to help you and be benevolent and kind. And so we don't think of this as totalitarianism. We don't think of it that way because we see the contrast between that in the past, or the contrast between that and something like 1984, which is very harsh and severe. But it's still totalitarianism just the same. It's still force, right? There was still not a choice. There was still no room for dissent, right? Anyone who disagreed was evil and wrong and must be changed. And so it's still coercion. It's still changing people's viewpoints. It's still forcing one evil ideology on people. So it's still something, of course, that we want to be against. And I think also realize that if we don't stop it while it's soft, it may quickly become harsh or hard totalitarianism. So the namesake of the book is Live Not by Lies, and that's really the stance that we want to take, is to say that the lies that are happening in our culture are not going to come through me. That, you can make your choice, but I'm not going to stand for this lie. I'm not going to speak those words. I'm not going to support that cause. I'm not going to, stand or kneel or whatever you may be forced to do or coerced into doing, that you won't take part in those things. So a couple of examples where this might come out would be something like gender identity, right? Someone might say, well, you have to call me by these pronouns, or you have to address me as this. And you don't have to, right? You can live in truth. You can just not let that lie come out of your mouth and not participate in that, not speak those words that they're asking you to say. Another example would be, with DEI, we see these initiatives, these trainings. People are being trained to view certain groups as the oppressed and certain groups as the oppressors. And they might ask you to think of people in those groups, to use that language, to use those terms about yourself or about others. And you can say, no, right? I'm not going to view people as the oppressed or the oppressor. I'm going to view myself as a human and them as a human and treat people with compassion, right? Don't let those lies come through you. And so a great example of someone who was standing up, or an organization really that was standing up, was In-N-Out. So in California, there were certain cities, this back during COVID times when people were paranoid and wanted everyone to get the COVID vaccine. So these cities were saying that restaurants had to check if people had been vaccinated in order to have them dine inside the restaurant. And In-N-Out just refused. They said, no, we won't do that. We won't check customers to see if they're vaccinated or not. We're a restaurant and we're going to run our business the way that we want to. And so they didn't. And as far as I understand, they didn't face any consequences for that, but they did risk facing consequences for that, right? That could have definitely led to a legal battle. It could have led to fights with the state. And, who knows who would have won those court cases at the time if it had gone that far. But they were willing to take that stance to say that there's a boundary that I won't cross, right? There's a part of this that I won't participate in, and I won't check people's vaccination statuses. And so we want to have that strength. We want to take the time to think through what are our values? What's important to me? What's the truth that I'm willing to stand for? That even if someone says, you have to say this, or you have to check this, or you have to do this, that you'd be willing to say, no, I don't. I won't participate. And if we don't take the time to think through what we really believe about issues and to think through what we're willing to stand up for, then when the time comes up, we won't. We'll cower and we'll just do what everyone else is doing. So it's really important that we have these conversations, that we think about what's going on, so that we are prepared when those moments come up for us. And there is a value in suffering. There's that risk that we take when we stand up for the truth of, maybe losing friends, maybe making somebody unhappy with us, getting into conflicts or arguments. For some, it's bigger. Some, it might be not getting promoted. It might be not having your job anymore. But there is a value to suffering. And this is also something that Dreher talks about. So he says, relatively few contemporary Christians are prepared to suffer for the faith because the therapeutic society that has formed them denies the purpose of suffering in the first place, and the idea of bearing pain for the sake of truth seems ridiculous. This just shows this whole culture that we live in of indulgence. This culture just wants to say, you should have everything that you want, you should be happy, kind of everything's about your happiness. It's just wrong. It's not true. There are so many things that are more important, that are more valuable than your happiness. Right? You can be unhappy and still have peace. Right? You can be unhappy and still stand for truth, still have courage, still have honor. Right? There are these virtuous traits that are so much better than just being nice, and that lead to so much better outcomes in your life than just happiness. Right? Happiness is a very low thing to shoot for in your life. There's so much better things that you can strive for. But it does require that you're willing to go through suffering. It doesn't mean you seek suffering, but you need to be willing to suffer and take those risks that involve having virtues. So in the second part of the book, Dreher talks to a bunch of people who lived through communism, who saw the rise and fall of communism. So they lost so many more freedoms than what we're experiencing now. But they also experienced those first signs and those first moments before full communism had set in. But they retained their values, they retained their beliefs, they were able to still pass those beliefs on to the next generation. And so we can learn so much from those people. And so one of the other things they say about suffering is this: but know this too, if we Latter-day believers are not able and willing to be faithful in the relatively small trials we face now, there is no reason to think we will have what it takes to endure serious persecution in the future. And so Dreher is saying this, as a contrast, we can see that we're not suffering the same harsh totalitarianism that's happened in the past. But if we can't even handle the soft things that are happening now, then how are we going to say that we can handle the harsh things that will happen later? We need to now already be willing to stand up for what we believe in, to speak the truth, to not live by lies, so that we're prepared for whatever happens in the future. If we're able to, turn the cultural tides around and get people to value truth, and that's great. And if we're not and we face, more severe consequences, like, we'll be ready. We can still be able to pass down our values to the next generation. So it's so important that we think about these ideas. If you're interested in more, I would definitely recommend reading Live Not by Lies by Rod Dreher. It's an excellent book. I really enjoyed it, and I got a lot out of it. And speaking of those beliefs that we need to take the time to sit and think about, up next we have a segment called 10 Takes, where I'll be getting into some of the things that I believe. 10 Takes is a moment for me to just share 10 things that I believe. So these are just statements about several different topics, and I'm just going to give myself 45 seconds to just give a really short explanation of my statement. This is just an opportunity for you to get to know a little bit about what I think about things. So of course, these explanations are short. Feel free to leave comments and questions below. Let's start with our first one. The Second Amendment protects us from tyranny. So I'm just going to quick read the Second Amendment. A well-regulated militia, being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms, shall not be infringed. I think a lot of the current conversation about the right to bear arms, people talk about self-defense and, whether or not that's more important than people just not having any guns at all. This kind of theoretical view that if we make a law where people can't have guns, then there will be no guns. Which is unrealistic because criminals don't really care if you make a new law about that. But on top of that, that's really not the main purpose of the amendment. It's to stop the government from taking our freedoms away, which has historically happened in many countries. Our next one is abortion is wrong. So I fully believe that all life has value, and that includes the life within the womb. And it doesn't matter what the circumstances are. It doesn't matter how desired or not desired the child is. It's just a fact that that child has value. God created people. God loves us. And if God loves his creation, then we should love other people as well. So the proper response to a mother who's unable to care for her child or who doesn't want to is to provide resources to help her to overcome those hindrances, or to help her pursue adoption, right? There are good outcomes that can come out of even poor situations and difficult circumstances. Number 3, there is no moral argument for an open border. So we see so much conversation going on now about the immigrants who are coming through our southern border. And it's really devastating and tragic to see the things that are going on, to see the violence, to see the drugs coming through, to see sex trafficking. It's honestly just insane that people wouldn't realize that this is a crisis and that it needs to be stopped. There's really no moral reason to support illegal immigration. Of course, we want legal immigration to continue, but that can't continue if we don't have any security and if we're not enforcing our current laws. So it's very important that we have law and order, that we have structure and stability so that we can keep our own country safe, so that we can maintain our values and help the people who are here. Number 4, no one should be forced to take a vaccine. So I believe this about all vaccines. I think people should be able to have their own choice. Of course, some vaccines are more common than others, and the big controversy happened with the COVID vaccine. Initially, the scientific achievement was interesting, how fast they came out with it, but then it quickly turned south when this became very coercive and very much a manipulative thing, especially with people losing their jobs over not wanting to take a vaccine that was so new and people didn't know the outcomes of it. I mean, it's really outrageous to consider that they would force someone to take something without even knowing what would happen to them. And people who had allergies, people who had pre-existing conditions, no one should be forced into a situation like that. Number 5, schools need to partner with parents, not override parents. It's so important in the life of a child to see that the relationship between school and home, and to see that it's positive, that parents are able to have positive interactions with teachers, principals, school staff are able to have positive interactions with parents. I mean, that matters to a child, having that unity between those two places where they spend so much of their time. But what we see today is that schools are just willing to slash out parents. instead of taking the time to communicate what's going on and to keep parents involved. They're too focused on their own ideologies and what they want to pass on to children instead of focusing purely on how to educate the child with the information that they need and keep that partnership with parents. Number 6, if you love someone, you will not affirm their gender identity. And of course, here what I'm talking about is people who have chosen a different gender identity than their actual gender identity that they were born in. So if you really love someone, you will speak the truth to them. And sometimes that requires hurting their feelings. But there are more important things than people's emotions, and truth is one of those things. And if someone comes up to you and says that they want to be a different person, what they're saying is that they want to destroy their current self, that they want to destroy who they are now. So if you're affirming their new identity, you're affirming the destruction of who they are now, which is, of course, not a loving thing to do. No one should destroy themselves. No one should destroy their identities. And we should love who people are as they are. Number 7, there is a time and place for war, but it is not forever and always. We see conversation all the time, wars and rumors of wars, and that will always be true. We live in a huge world, many countries have many conflicts, and it's not our place to step into every single one of those conflicts, to have opinions about every single conflict, to give money to every single conflict. We just don't need to do that. And particularly right now for our country, we really shouldn't be so concerned with foreign affairs. Of course, there is an appropriate time and place. We should be prepared. We should be able to defend ourselves, but we need to take care of the things that are going on here. We need to secure our own border. We need to take care of our own financial crisis that's happening here and the debt that we're in. And we can't just be meddling in everybody's affairs throughout the globe. Number 8, the cure for racism is compassion. So I love the biblical story of the Good Samaritan. And this story in the Bible is really a story about countering racism, right? Where we have two people of different racial groups that didn't like each other, but the one was the only person who actually helped the other. And so that's what we need today. We need people who will see the humanity in the other person, who will be willing to give and to receive help from someone, regardless of what race they are, regardless of what historical differences we have, or even current differences and cultural viewpoints. We can still care for each other. We can still love one another. We can still see the humanity. Number 9, the church needs to learn how to hate what is evil. The church has really just ran with this idea of love. We have to love everything, love everyone, love everything about everyone, and accept everything about them. And that's really not biblical. It is true that we love other people, that we love all other people, that God created them. But it is not true that we accept everything about them, or that we even love everything about that person. The Bible actually says very often that we should hate what is evil, and that we should expose evil. We don't want people to be destroyed by their sins. And if we really believe that what's happening is sin, and we believe that what's in their life is bad for them, then we should want them to repent of it and turn from it, not just live in it still. And lastly, the truth is absolute. All other statements that I have said all depend on there being a truth that is actually real. There has to be a reality, a foundation of what we believe to exist, of how we believe the nature of humankind is, of what our relationship is to God, of if morality exists, and what right and wrong actually is. If we have no foundation of truth, then we have no ability to have rational arguments, to reason things out, to make wise decisions, right? There is one truth, and you can't just make it up for yourself. You can't just feel it. You can't just magically create it out of your own mind. It's actually a reality that exists outside of just you and is true for all things. And we must acknowledge that truth is absolute. Well, that ends 10 takes. So I hope that helps you get a little taste of what I think. If you want more explanation on any of those things, or you're wondering about something else that I didn't bring up, feel free to leave your questions in the comments and I'd be happy to address those. But next, we're going to get into random reactions. Our last segment for today is random reactions. So I'll just be pulling a video that I've seen online and just play some of it and just talk about whatever's going on in the video. So let's check it out.
Here's my hot take as a doctor. I totally agree. It is okay to be fat. We don't say that enough, but it needs to be normalized. If you are fat, that is okay. It is typically not a problem that requires immediate solving. It is not an emergency. You don't have to drop everything in the pursuit of being not fat. Erin said this other thing in a different video that I totally agree with as well, is that it is okay to not be healthy. We act like it is this moral failing, this cardinal sin that you deserve a scarlet letter if you are not healthy. And there's a name for that, and that's called Health-ism.
All right, so I think the Health-ism word throughout there at the end was a little bit ridiculous. I mean, I think when we hear these isms, racism, sexism, it's this idea that you're treating somebody differently, right, based on that. And of course, in our normal day-to-day life, like, we're not going to introduce ourselves and give all of our health conditions and treat people differently based on what they say. But as a medical professional, like, you should treat people differently based on their health. That is the purpose of your job, is that somebody comes in and you are evaluating their health and you are responding to their condition appropriately for that condition, right? You should be treating your patients differently based on what level of health they are in. You should be recommending different things, whether they actually need those things or not. And then this conversation at the beginning about it's okay to be fat. Well, I mean, of course, it's like she said, it's not an immediate, you have to drop everything in your life and immediately change everything, but it does make a difference. I mean, if you're overweight, it does change it can affect so many different things. It can affect your emotional health. It can affect your ability to just do things through the day. It can affect how tired you are. Just your quality of life can be different. And so, of course, your goal should be to pursue a healthy lifestyle that will help you to, get through the day more easily, to be able to do more things physically, to be less tired, to enjoy yourself more. And as a medical professional, that's what your goal should be for your patients, is to try to get them to a better quality of life. You shouldn't be so focused on whether or not you're going to offend someone or hurt their feelings that you're not willing to just have an honest conversation about what their lifestyle is like, about what could be done to improve their lifestyle, about whether or not they actually are overweight. That is a real thing for people, and it makes a big difference for someone's life when they are able to overcome that hurdle of their weight and they're able to come out on the other side. I mean, I've seen it myself in people's lives. I've seen plenty of stories online. You see the transformations of people, but they also talk about how they feel, about how they're more active, how they're able to do things. And I think we hinder ourselves, just pulling bigger picture here, I think we hinder ourselves as a society when we focus so much on if we're going to hurt somebody's feelings with what we say, and we don't let people make progress and we don't let people move forward from things. So it's really important that we're able to just keep talking to people and be honest and authentic and have real conversations with people about real problems. So that's my random reaction to this video for today. Thanks for joining us for our first ever episode of the Autumn Brueckmann Show. Be sure to come back in, as we'll periodically be having new segments come on and talking about different things. And also feel free to leave your comments below. I'd love to hear your thoughts about any of the things that we talked about today. And remember to live in truth.